In the spring of 1925, a man walked into a luxury hotel in Paris and convinced 5 of the city's wealthiest scrap metal dealers that France was about to tear down its most famous landmark. The Eiffel Tower, he told them, was rusting. It was too expensive to maintain. The government wanted it gone, and he was the man authorized to sell it. Within weeks, he had collected a fortune. Then he disappeared. But here's the truly unbelievable part. He came back and did it all over again. His name was Victor Lustig. And before you dismiss this as just another con artist's tale, consider this. He didn't just trick ordinary people. He swindled Al Capone. He forged bonds that fooled bankers. He escaped from federal custody. And somehow, for decades, he lived like royalty while police on 2 continents hunted him. This is the story of the most audacious confidence man of the 20th century. A man whose lies were so perfect that even his victims doubted their own eyes. Victor Lustig was born in 1890 in what is now the Czech Republic. Though the exact details of his early life remain murky because Lustig himself told a different story to everyone he met. What we know for certain is that by his early 20s, he was working the ocean liners between Paris and New York, posing as a wealthy aristocrat and charming his way into the pockets of genuine millionaires. He spoke 5 languages fluently. He dressed in tailored suits. He had a scar on his left cheek that he claimed came from a duel, though it probably came from a brawl. He was handsome, smooth, and utterly without conscience. By the early 1920s, Lustig had perfected his craft. He sold a box that he claimed could duplicate $100 bills. He convinced a banker in Missouri to invest in a fake oil company. He was arrested multiple times but always managed to talk his way out or simply vanish before trial. But it was in Paris, in 1925, that he conceived his masterpiece. Lustig had been reading the newspapers. The Eiffel Tower, built for the 1889 World's Fair, was never meant to be permanent. Some Parisians still considered it an eyesore. There were rumors about maintenance costs. Lustig saw an opportunity. He rented an office and had stationery printed with an official-sounding government letterhead. Then he sent letters to 5 of the most prominent scrap metal dealers in Paris, inviting them to a confidential meeting at the Hôtel de Crillon, one of the city's most prestigious addresses. The letter was vague but intriguing. It hinted at a government contract of enormous value. It demanded absolute secrecy. All 5 men showed up. Lustig arrived in a chauffeured car. He wore a perfect suit. He carried a leather briefcase embossed with gold initials. He introduced himself as the Deputy Director General of the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs, the agency that oversaw the Eiffel Tower. His assistant, a man named Dapper Dan Collins, played the role of government secretary. Lustig's performance was flawless. He spoke in hushed tones about the tower's deteriorating condition. He showed them forged documents. He even arranged a private tour of the monument, pointing out rust and structural concerns that he'd invented on the spot. The dealers were convinced. But Lustig had studied each man carefully. He'd chosen his target before the meeting even began. His name was André Poisson, a scrap dealer who was newer to Paris and desperate to break into the inner circles of the city's business elite. Poisson was wealthy but insecure. He wanted respect. Lustig recognized that hunger. It made Poisson the perfect mark. Over the next few days, Lustig cultivated Poisson carefully. He invited him to private lunches. He confided that the bidding process was, of course, just a formality, but that certain arrangements could be made to ensure the right man won. Lustig even played a brilliant psychological trick. He hinted, nervously, that he was a government official who didn't earn very much, and that a man in his position might appreciate a private gift in exchange for his influence. It was a bribe. But by asking for a bribe, Lustig made the entire scheme seem more real. After all, Poisson thought, if this were a scam, why would the man risk asking for money under the table? Poisson paid. He handed over the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of today's dollars, part for the winning bid and part for Lustig's personal envelope. Lustig and Collins took the cash, boarded a train to Vienna, and disappeared. Poisson, when he finally realized he'd been conned, was so humiliated that he never went to the police. He'd been tricked into trying to bribe a government official. If he reported the crime, he'd be confessing to attempted corruption. Lustig had designed the scam so that the victim's own shame would keep him silent. But here's where the story becomes almost surreal. A few months later, Lustig returned to Paris and ran the exact same con again. He contacted a different group of scrap dealers. He rented another office. He printed new stationery. He gave the same speech about rust and maintenance and government budget cuts. And incredibly, it almost worked a second time. The second victim, however, was either braver or less embarrassed than Poisson. He went to the police. By the time officers arrived at Lustig's hotel, he was already on a ship back to the United States. Lustig spent the next decade running cons across America. In Chicago, he somehow convinced Al Capone to invest $50,000 in a stock deal. Lustig held the money for 2 months, then returned it, claiming the deal had fallen through. Capone, impressed by Lustig's apparent honesty, gave him $5,000 as a thank-you reward. That had been Lustig's plan from the beginning. He knew Capone would admire a man who returned money. The reward was the real score. In Oklahoma, Lustig sold his money-duplicating box to a wealthy rancher. The box was an elegant wooden case with a slot on each end and a complex-looking set of dials and gears. Lustig demonstrated it by inserting a $100 bill into one slot. 6 hours later, he opened the other slot and pulled out $200 bills. The rancher was stunned. He paid $30,000 for the box. What the rancher didn't know was that the box contained a hidden compartment loaded with pre-stacked bills. After the genuine bills ran out, all the box produced was blank paper. By then, Lustig was long gone. For years, Lustig evaded capture through a combination of charm, false identities, and sheer audacity. He carried multiple passports. He rented apartments under different names in different cities. He changed his appearance constantly. But his lifestyle was expensive. He stayed in the best hotels. He wore custom suits. He dined at the finest restaurants. He always needed another score. And eventually, that greed caught up with him. In 1934, Lustig partnered with a chemist to produce counterfeit $20 bills. The bills were nearly perfect. For a while, Lustig flooded the East Coast with fake currency. But counterfeiting was different from confidence games. It left a trail. Federal agents tracked the bills back to Lustig's operation. In 1935, he was arrested in New York. Even then, he nearly escaped. While awaiting trial, he fashioned a rope from bed sheets and climbed out of a window at the Federal House of Detention. He was free for 27 days before agents found him hiding in Pittsburgh. At his trial, the evidence was overwhelming. Lustig was convicted of counterfeiting and sentenced to 20 years in Alcatraz. He arrived at the island prison in 1936. His charm didn't work on the guards. His tricks didn't work on the other inmates. For the first time in his life, Victor Lustig had no way out. He died in prison in 1947, 11 years into his sentence, from pneumonia. He was 57 years old. According to prison records, he had no visitors and no remaining family. The man who once dined with millionaires died alone, but Lustig's legacy didn't end with his death. His cons became legend. The Eiffel Tower scam, in particular, became a teaching case in psychology and criminology. Experts studied how Lustig exploited what they now call authority bias and confirmation bias. He understood that people see what they expect to see. If you dress like a government official, speak like a government official, and meet in a location where government officials work, most people will believe you are a government official. Lustig also understood shame. He built his scams so that the victim had a reason not to report the crime. That's why Poisson stayed silent. That's why so many of Lustig's victims never went to the police. Modern con artists still use variations of Lustig's techniques. The Nigerian prince email scam, for example, works on the same principle as the Eiffel Tower con. The scammer offers a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that requires secrecy and a small upfront payment. The victim's greed overrides their skepticism. By the time they realize they've been tricked, they're too embarrassed to admit it. Lustig didn't invent the confidence game, but he perfected it. He understood that the most effective scams don't just fool the victim, they make the victim fool themselves. There's a question that historians and psychologists still debate. Was Victor Lustig a criminal genius, or just a gifted liar who got lucky? The answer probably lies somewhere in between. Lustig had genuine talent. He could read people with extraordinary accuracy. He had an actor's ability to inhabit a role completely. He was patient, disciplined, and meticulous in his planning. But he was also reckless. He could never walk away. He could never stop. And that compulsion, that need for the next score, eventually destroyed him.